The most powerful man in the Roman Empire sat down to dinner with his family. On the table, roasted meats, good wine, and one of his favorite dishes, mushrooms, gathered and prepared with care, the way they always were for him. By sunrise, he was dead. Officially, the physicians blamed his age. He was 63, and Rome had grown used to the idea that its emperors did not live forever. But almost immediately, another story began moving through the palace corridors, quieter and far more dangerous than the official one. That the emperor had not simply died, that he had been killed, and that the person responsible may have been sitting close enough to see it happen. This is the story of Emperor Claudius, the woman beside him, and the dinner that may have decided who would rule the most powerful empire on earth. To understand why anyone would want Claudius dead, you first have to understand how unlikely it was that he ever became emperor at all. He wasn't raised to rule. As a child, Claudius had a limp, a stammer, and tremors his own family found embarrassing. Ancient writers describe relatives who avoided being seen with him in public. He was, by the standards of the Roman elite, an inconvenience, a name tolerated, never a name expected to matter. So while the rest of his family fought over influence, plotted marriages, and postured for the succession, nobody bothered plotting against Claudius. Why would you conspire against a man nobody believed would ever hold power? That single assumption may have saved his life more than once. In 41 AD, that changed. The Emperor Caligula, vicious, unstable, and widely hated even by his own guard, was cut down by his own soldiers in a palace corridor. In the chaos that followed, someone found Claudius hiding behind a curtain, terrified he was next. Instead, the Praetorian Guard did something almost nobody expected. They made him emperor. Not because they respected him, because he was convenient, a Claudian bloodline they could control, installed quickly to stop the bleeding before Rome tore itself apart. Nobody thought he would last. He ruled for 13 years. In that time, the man everyone underestimated expanded the empire into Britain, reformed Rome's courts, and built the roads and aqueducts that would carry his name long after his death. The stammering boy nobody wanted to be seen with had quietly become one of the most effective rulers Rome had seen in a generation. But surviving the throne and keeping it were two very different problems, and the danger Claudius now faced wasn't going to come from a rival general or a foreign war. It was going to come from his own dinner table. By the early 50s AD, Claudius had married for a fourth time to his niece, Agrippina the Younger. It was, even by Roman standards, a scandalous match, one that required the Senate to bend its own laws on incest to allow it. But Agrippina wasn't marrying for love. She was building a position. She was sharp, calculating, and had already survived exile, widowhood, and a decade of imperial politics that had killed people far more powerful than her. She understood something most people at court didn't want to admit out loud. In Rome, the difference between power and death was often decided at a private dinner, not a public vote. She had a son from a previous marriage. His name was Nero. Claudius had a son of his own too, Britannicus, his biological heir, the boy Roman law and Roman expectation both pointed toward. Agrippina had other plans. She pushed for Nero's adoption into the imperial family. She arranged his marriage to Claudius's daughter, binding him even tighter to the succession. Step by step, she maneuvered Nero into position ahead of the emperor's own son. And for a while, it worked. Nero rose. Britannicus was quietly sidelined. Then something happened that Agrippina could not control. Claudius began to change his mind. Ancient sources say that in the final months of his life, Claudius grew fond of Britannicus again, visibly, publicly, in ways that could not be ignored at court. There were signs he intended to name his own son as heir after all, undoing everything Agrippina had spent years building. If that happened, everything she had risked, her marriage, her reputation, her son's entire future, would disappear in a single announcement. She could not afford to wait and see if the rumors were true. So, according to the historian Tacitus, Agrippina made a decision. She reached out to a woman already infamous in Roman circles for one particular skill: a poisoner named Locusta, someone the imperial court had used before and would use again. The plan was simple. Claudius loved mushrooms. Mushrooms could hide almost anything. The dinner itself would have looked, to anyone watching, like any other night in the palace. Roman banquets weren't just meals, they were theater, a way for the powerful to display exactly how powerful they were. Guests reclined on couches rather than sitting upright. Servants moved constantly between them, carrying wine, bread, fruit, and delicacies gathered from across the empire Claudius himself had expanded. Somewhere among the dishes that night was a plate of mushrooms. We'll never know exactly what Claudius was thinking as he ate, whether he suspected anything, whether Agrippina's expression gave anything away as she watched him take the first bite. What we do know is what happened next. Not long after the meal, Claudius became violently ill. He vomited repeatedly. His speech, already difficult his whole life, grew worse. At first, this might have looked unremarkable. Roman banquets involved enormous quantities of food, and Claudius was known to eat and drink heavily. But the hours passed and he didn't recover. He got worse. And here the story takes an even darker turn, one modern historians treat with real caution, but ancient writers were eager to tell. Suetonius claims that when the poison didn't act fast enough, a second method was used. A physician named Xenophon, they say, placed a feather down the emperor's throat, supposedly to help him vomit up whatever was making him sick. Except the feather itself, according to this account, had already been coated in poison. Cassius Dio tells a similar story, with small differences. Whether either version is literally true, we cannot say for certain. These accounts were written decades after Claudius died, by men who never witnessed the events themselves, drawing on court rumor, political gossip, and stories that had already been retold many times before they were ever written down. It's entirely possible Claudius died of something far less dramatic: a stroke. Naturally occurring toxins in wild mushrooms, which were not always easy to identify safely even for experienced cooks. Simple age catching up with a body that had never been strong to begin with. No physical evidence survives. No autopsy was ever performed that could answer the question. What we're left with is a body, a timeline, and a long list of people who benefited enormously from what happened next. By the following morning, Emperor Claudius was dead. In any suspicious death, investigators, ancient or modern, tend to ask the same question first: who benefited? In this case, the answer arrived almost immediately, and it arrived fast enough to raise its own suspicions. Within hours, Nero, not Britannicus, the emperor's own son, was presented to the Praetorian Guard. The soldiers pledged their loyalty. The Senate confirmed him. A 17-year-old was now the most powerful person alive, and the transition happened with a speed that unsettled even contemporary observers. Tacitus claims Agrippina deliberately delayed announcing Claudius's death until every political arrangement was already secured. That while the emperor's body still lay inside the palace, her people were already making sure no one could challenge what came next. If true, it means the succession wasn't a reaction to Claudius's death. It was already prepared before he took his final bite. Britannicus, the boy many Romans still believed should inherit everything, found himself, almost overnight, a stranger in his own father's palace. He didn't stay alive for long. Less than a year later, Britannicus collapsed and died during another banquet. Once again, ancient writers pointed to poison. This time, the accusation pointed directly at Nero. Whatever the truth behind either death, the outcome was unmistakable. The last serious rival to Nero's throne was gone. The path Agrippina had spent years building was now completely clear. For a while, it looked like she'd won everything. Nero's early reign, guided by experienced advisors, actually began reasonably well, stable, even promising by Roman standards. It would not stay that way. As the years passed, Nero's rule became defined by paranoia, executions, and excess. And, in one of history's sharper ironies, the woman who had maneuvered so carefully to put her son on the throne would eventually be killed on his orders too. A mother destroyed, in the end, by the very ambition that made her son an emperor in the first place. The dinner that was supposed to secure her family's future had instead set in motion the fall of nearly everyone at that table. So, did Agrippina poison Claudius? Here's what we can honestly say, and what we can't. Confirmed. Claudius died suddenly in October of 54 AD. Nero became emperor almost immediately afterward. Agrippina had spent years actively positioning Nero ahead of Claudius's own son. These facts are accepted by virtually every historian who studies this period. Likely, Claudius's death was extraordinarily convenient for Agrippina, at the exact moment she stood to lose everything. Ancient sources consistently describe her as ambitious, capable, and directly involved in the politics of succession. Someone with both clear motive and real opportunity. Debated and probably permanently unresolved. The poisoned mushrooms, the poisoned feather, Locusta's exact role. These details come entirely from writers working decades after the fact, and historians today still disagree on how much of it is documented fact, how much is court gossip dressed up as history, and how much was simply too good a story for ancient writers to leave alone. We may never know which version is true. Empires are usually remembered for their wars, for battles, generals, and the borders that shift because of them. But this one didn't change at the edge of a sword. It changed at a dinner table, over a dish of mushrooms, in a room full of people who each had their own reasons to stay quiet about what they saw. Whether Claudius died from poison or simply from age, that single evening ended one reign and began another, and the empire that followed would look nothing like the one he built. Some moments in history are loud enough that everyone remembers them. Others happen quietly, over dinner, and are almost forgotten entirely. Mortcourse exists to find the second kind, the forgotten moments sitting quietly behind the history everyone already knows. If you enjoy uncovering the forgotten moments that shaped history, subscribe to Mortcourse. We'll uncover another one soon.